This is the Signal Cafe, where we bring you stories and lessons from the Agile community. Today, we're speaking with Chris Puglisi, Agile coach, entrepreneur, author of the book Getting to Done, and host of the Notables podcast. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So let's start out with your story. How did you get into coaching and business coaching? And tell the listeners a little bit about you, about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I actually, quote unquote, grew up as a software developer back starting in the early 90s, and started taking more of a management track. So started leading software development teams, and then software development divisions, and then IT departments, all the way up to more senior levels of management, up to kind of the VP level role, particularly in healthcare companies. So I was building and leading technology teams. And a big component of that was project management. At that point, I had several project managers that reported into me, and I was managing a portfolio of projects. So I saw how things were being done, and almost perfectly aligned with industry standards. There were most of our projects, probably 80% of them, were either over budget, over time, over schedule, and I started to notice this and trying to figure out why. And then all of a sudden, my journey led me to Johnson & Johnson. And while I was there, I actually was there it was initially a 2-year engagement as a technical project manager for the redesign of the AccuView brand website, so AccuView.com. And all of a sudden, my boss at the time came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to try to do this thing called Agile. And we want you to be what's called a Scrum Master." This is going back about 12 years now. And about 10 years, actually. And I said, cool, sounds great. So the next day, they sent me down to a 1-day intensive training session. I didn't get a certification or anything like that. It was just a semi-informal training. Came back out the next day and took on 3 teams as a Scrum Master and had to get all of those teams trained and practicing Scrum. One of the things I did notice over the next year and a half of piloting, Johnson & Johnson had decided to use the AccuView brand as a pilot, as a test for Agile before rolling it out, or before they made a decision to roll it out to all 238 operating companies globally. And one of the things that I noticed just in the first couple of months was, number one, just happier teams. People were getting along better. They were in a more safe environment. They were practicing. They were delivering at a more frequent rate. So they had a higher release frequency. And they ultimately had a better work-life balance. We were delivering more value faster and more frequently. And I said, oh my God, why would you do things any differently? That was a turning point for me. I saw it in action. I saw it work. It wasn't all, a walk in the park. That's for sure. There were a tremendous amount of challenges because, as you would suspect, in most, agile transformations, it's effectively what was starting, but at the ground level, it was a bottom-up approach that middle management, and even to a certain degree senior management, who said they were behind it, really weren't behind it. If you know what I mean. They were checking the box themselves and saying, okay, we're going Agile, but they weren't walking the talk. And so I saw a lot of gaps that early on in, reaching true business agility. But for me, having worked with so many teams and, basically staffed and worked on so many different projects, or led so many different projects, I saw it as, this is the way to go. How could you do it differently? Like I said, so sure. I ran with that. And over the next, 8 years or so, I was involved in several organizations that I was brought in. I was a Scrum Master essentially without the certifications or anything. And I decided, some companies were small startups, and at one point I had gone out and opened my own. I founded a company called Tech House, which is a tech startup incubator that was located in Santa Barbara, which is where I live.
Yep.
And all the teams that I was bringing in there, I was not only building a network of qualified investors, but I created a nice co-working space, gave between 6 and 8 teams a space to work and grow,
Sure.
and then coached them on their product delivery strategy. So, and I used, I was dipping in and out of some lean principles, but mainly more on the agile side, in either Kanban or Scrum at that point. There were small teams, and helped them out. So I literally never looked back, and that ultimately led me into going out to pursue some certifications in the industry and continue to, I ended up at Sony Pictures as a senior level enterprise agile coach, to come in and help with that transformation, which is where I still am. I'm going on my second year there, and that's how I got into it. I kind of just fell into it not because it was in vogue, not because of anything else, except for I was struggling with literally hundreds of projects worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that weren't, in my mind, successful, and beating my head
Sure.
against the wall trying to figure out why. And I saw this as a solution, and I saw this as a way to not only create better, happier teams, but deliver more value more frequently, and actually bring projects in on time within budget, which was, an amazing feat at that time. So,
Yeah.
so that's how I got into it. No, I never look back.
It's a win-win, right? Happy
100%.
people, happy teams, and business value being delivered more and faster.
Right.
So you've worked with plenty of teams. You've worked as an enterprise agile coach with more program portfolio management, with startups, with Fortune 50 companies. What do you see with the majority of teams or organizations that have decided to take this agile journey? What are some of the common challenges that you see across the different scenarios, and how have those challenges been solved in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually, there's many, of course, and anybody out there that's listening, and I'm sure can attest to that. But I think if I had to look, over the last 10 to 12 years, I could say the majority of the issues that I faced and the teams I worked with have faced kind of boil down to two. One is adoption, particularly from the top down. The second one is mindset, and that would be from adopting a more agile mindset and way of working, and understanding why we're doing those things, and seeing the real benefits and value from the bottom up and the top down. So I see a lot of CIOs, and I work with the senior leadership team at Sony, the CIO down, that basically maybe they've read something somewhere, maybe they've heard it, they've read a book, they live in a podcast, an audio book, and they decide, oh, we should go agile too. Everybody else is doing it. And it becomes a directive, but then it doesn't really gain the support that you think it would from that level down, which I think is very, very critical. I always refer to kind of walking the talk. It's, don't just say, hey, we're going agile, and then get in your room with a senior level management team and be working off a Microsoft project plan, and doing taking a very waterfall approach to even greenlighting projects. At that level, you're working with a portfolio, making decisions on where to put resources, add resources, etc. It's more of a strategic view. And if you're approaching that in a waterfall way, you're really, really missing out on the benefits of true business agility. The other problem that I see is the mindset, which is people on the ground, people on the street that are actually practicing Scrum and XP and Kanban or whatever else. Any of the delivery, mechanisms or delivery frameworks are going through the motions of practicing Scrum, going from event. They're holding all the events. I'll go out there and do a maturity assessment with the team, and like, oh, we're doing great because we're holding stand-ups every day. Well, that's great, and that's very, very important. But what they don't really get to is, why are we doing that? They're kind of checking boxes and going through the motions, but they're not really understanding. It's not helping with, in a lot of cases, with the team dynamics, the teaming portion of it.
Sure.
So I've kind of boiled it down to those two things. And in terms of solving it, I think, that goes into a deeper level. I can get into a rabbit hole on that question, but with the senior leadership team, I think the best way to understand what benefits are is by practicing. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people talk about adopting an agile mindset. I take a little bit of a different view on that. And, it's hard to go through a PowerPoint deck with a senior leadership team, or even a team of project team members that are practicing Scrum, and take them through a deck or a 1-day training or 2-day training class to say, this is how you need to think about things.
Right.
It's kind of the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Agile principles align more to a growth mindset. And that's not something you can just pick up a book. You can learn about it, but you have to practice it, because your old behaviors are never gone. They're always there, wanting to kind of sneak back up. But until you practice enough, you know how and have the capability to kind of squash those, put those back down, and focus on more of the growth mindset, principles and behavioral patterns. So the best way to do that is by practice. It's what I like to call learning to see. And people that practice, people that have a growth mindset and practice at it, see things that others don't, because they practice. It's like, a tennis player. You look at Andre Agassi, will move around the court as soon as his opponent throws the ball in the air to serve it, because he's seen it so many times. He knows what it's going to do. So and he takes that feedback and then moves accordingly. So to me, the best way to do is to start practicing. So with senior leadership teams and even middle management, I found that looking for real small wins, interviewing managers, interviewing senior leadership team members, asking them, what's one problem, what's one challenge you're having? And maybe it's, we have so much stuff going on, we have so many projects, I really don't have a way to see everything holistically to make decisions quickly. So in one instance, I set up, a very simple kind of out of the gate Kanban system, and giving them at least an understanding of what's in their universe of projects, what's in their portfolio enterprise wide, and which ones are at risk. So, and then being able to visualize what's on your plate and how that work is flowing through your system, whatever system you have, what that looks like. That enables leaders and managers to make very quick decisions and on where to move resources, which projects may we want to stop pursuing, which others maybe want to put more resources to, depending on the risk level. So once they start doing that, then they start to see the benefits. The same thing with middle managers. They can be telling their teams, oh, you need to be practicing Scrum, and you need to be using some kind of ALM tool like Jira or Rally or something, but they're not doing it themselves. So it's how much can you get behind it if you're not really practicing to see the benefits? So
sure, yeah, you haven't seen it, right? You need to learn to see.
Exactly.
So what I hear you saying is agility, like true business agility, doesn't equate to checking all the boxes. Like, we're doing Scrum, we're having the ceremonies, we have teams that are called Transformers and Marvel and fun names. It's a mindset shift or a culture shift. But at the same time, you can't distribute some pamphlets and throw up a deck and get that mindset shift. So
Right.
it's almost like start doing the practices, get that muscle memory, but then make sure that the understanding and the value perception and the mindset comes as a result of those practices and behaviors.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great summary, and it is one of those things, like I keep saying, that the learning to see is, even as small as it is, it's interesting. And I don't know if you've seen this before, but I see it all the time where, people tend to mirror the behaviors and actions of their managers and leaders. If you have a manager that's coming in late every day and leaving early, yet they are insisting that you practice Scrum. And there's some additional overhead, at least in the beginning stages with a starting team with Scrum until you're able to kind of, tweak it and adopt it to your own needs, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But it's very prescriptive, and it's a good starting point for a lot of teams that are just starting out in, agile practices. But it's one of those things where they're going to mirror the behaviors, and they're going to get their cues off of how their peers and their management and leaders are behaving. And if you have managers and leaders who are, practicing agile, either from a mechanical perspective with a delivery framework or from a, mindset perspective from, the principles. And, if they're exhibiting, if leaders and managers are coming into meetings and exhibiting the behaviors of, someone who's quote unquote agile, they're not pointing fingers. They're fostering experimentation, and they're using, quote unquote failure as opportunities to get better and learn and help coach and educate. That's when people
Yeah.
start to see how beneficial it is. I look at every manager and leader as really they should be their own coach. They should be coaches, at their level and exhibiting those behaviors. So yeah, absolutely right.
Awesome. So let's talk about Agile Talks, and let's talk about Notables, your podcast. Tell everybody a little bit about what you're currently working on with those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I probably over the last 3 or 4 years, as I've been out there in my agile travels and journey and working with several companies, some small, some big. I started documenting and blogging and joining some groups on LinkedIn, et cetera, and listening some podcasting, et cetera. And to me, I've picked up a lot. I've learned a lot through conversation, and I every day I'm either listening to podcasts, I'm listening to books or reading books, or joining conversations on LinkedIn and Facebook and Slack communities. And I love the amount of conversation that's been going on, and or has been for a while, but even more so now as Agile holistically has really become front and center as a way of thinking and working. And I love that so much that I decided, for me as a learning tool, I would start a podcast. And by that, I mean, I learn more through, long form conversation with people on a podcast than I do almost anywhere else. I've learned so many different things just in the 20, 22 episodes I've done. And one thing I found about the podcast was it's great. And I get some feedback here and there, but it's so immersive. It's such an engaging, experience, at least for me and the person that I'm talking with, and hopefully for my listeners. But I wanted to be able to kind of go full circle in that conversation, give people a way
Right.
to further engage, learn more, reach out to the people that I'm talking to, etc. So Agile Talks was, I was inspired by kind of TED Talks, and that's why I called it Agile Talks, to be in all honesty. So in the true spirit of Agile and being transparent, that's where the name was born. And so really what I did was I started to create a community on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn group called Agile Talks. I just brought on several contributors and moderators who are very, very experienced, from PhDs in organizational behavior and psychology, who have been practicing Agile and teach it at the university level, to guys that have just been on the street in the field for 15 years. Guys that have been working with extreme programming before Scrum was even a thing. And really to just help facilitate the breadth and depth of conversations going on there. So Agile Talks is really just an extension of that. I'm actually considering changing the Notables name to Agile Talks just to align with the full brand identity. But yeah, it's really a passion of mine. It's something that down the road, I would like to, obviously continue to grow the community, but then have live events as well. And I'm in discussions with, some people that are, have had a hand in creating, the Kanban, method, and on the Scrum side as well, and doing live events around the United States. Maybe towards the end of this year, I'll have my first one. 1-2 day events with a lot of speakers and a real engaging, informative session. But to me, it's all about the conversation. It's just like what we practice in Agile: communication, face-to-face, people talking and constantly learning and experimenting. And I think that's one of the ways to pick up more stuff that you might want to try and see if it works for you in your organization or in your company and your team. So that's what Agile Talks is really all about.
That's awesome. Yeah, you can listen to a bunch of podcasts and read a lot of books, but if you have questions, you're not going to get those answered unless they are specifically answered in the book. So the Agile Talks community on LinkedIn, the Slack channel, are excellent resources to go on and start conversations and ask those questions with people who have gone through the transformations, people that have a lot of experience. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Chris, I know that you have a jazz show to get to. Chris is a jazz musician in addition to all of the other cool things. So thank you again for coming onto the show and sharing your experiences and your wisdom. To learn more about what Chris is doing, you can listen to his podcast, Notables, on Spotify and iTunes. You can join the Agile Talks community on LinkedIn and the Agile Talks Slack channel. And you can get to all of that at his website, agiletalks.co. agiletalks.co. I'll link to all of that in the show notes on our site, signal.cafe. And that's a wrap. Chris, thank you so much.
Jack, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Have a great show.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All righty. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Talk to you soon.